What's going on, everybody? The original Mako back with some more Nobody Saves the World content. But before we get into that, be sure you check the links down below. Memberships, first link in the description. We can now have those on YouTube. I would really appreciate anybody who would be kind enough to become a member. It helps. Memberships on YouTube help me out like crazy. So check that out. I would really appreciate it. Helps, drive this content that you see every day. And it would mean a lot to me. So please check out that if you're interested in becoming a member. Plus, you get some exclusive content that's going to be coming right to your faces. So check that out. But also the Twitch links down there as well if you want to see me do some runs live, play some Nobody Saves the World live, some other games. We just have a lot of fun. It's a super laid back and chill community with a lot of interaction. So I'm sure a lot of you guys would like it and a lot of the people in there. So check that out as well. But we are going to be getting into a tier list for Nobody Saves the World today for all the different types of forms. And after beating the game and having unlocked every form and played with each form for a bit, I think I've been able to get a good opinion on what I think are top tier and bottom tier forms in the game. I also have some stats to throw around, like their total stat, their stat totals. Every character, or every form has health, stamina, speed, physical attack, physical defense, magical attack, and magical defense as stats. I've totaled all those up. We had to divide health by 10 because it was way too weighted towards health at the beginning, but now it's a lot more even. And kind of interesting when we talk about some of that stuff. But obviously, the forms, they have their signature ability and their signature passive skill, which can't be changed. But then you can mix and match any other moves and combos and whatever you want onto each different form. So the main thing we're going to be basing this off of is stat totals and which form has the best abilities to use, and which the best signature skill and passives as well, because those are important, but the best abilities that come with it. So that's what we're going to be talking about a bit. And I guess let's just go ahead and jump right into it. So first on the list, we have the Bodybuilder. And the Bodybuilder, I think, is going to be going into probably B tier, I think. Overall, if we're talking about like stat totals, he's literally dead center of the list here. Like right in the middle, very average. He's got a ton of health and a ton of physical attack, but everything else is relatively low. Speed is okay, but like physical defense, magical attack, magical defense, stamina, all of that is average or below average. So most of it is coming from his health and his physical attack. Now, his health and his physical attack are really, really good. So that's why I think he's going to be in B tier. He can put out a ton of damage. But the biggest reason he's in B tier, and I would consider putting him into A tier, is he has one of the more useful passives in the game that unlocks, which is Strongman. And attacks that knock enemies away gain the impact effect. And enemies take blunt damage when knocked into walls or each other, and the impact damage is plus 300%. So if you put this on any character that does blunt damage or knocks enemies back, the physical or the damage if they hit something is going to be increased by 300%. So you knock them into a wall, you knock them into another enemy, it's a guaranteed plus 300%. And once again, one of the better passives in the game. On almost all the builds that I used on Legendary Dungeons, was 100% using the Strongman. Unfortunately, it wasn't on the Bodybuilder, on a different character, but still, Bodybuilder makes for a pretty solid option, and one that you definitely want to unlock as soon as possible to get that Strongman passive. Next up, we got the big boy himself, the Dragon. And Dragon is going to go into S. I don't think it is the best character in the game, but it's in the top tier of health, so it has the same amount of health as the Bodybuilder and Necromancer. So the most health in the game out of all the forms. It has very overall just super solid stats, pretty decent stamina, decent speed, and everything else is just all around good. Defense is a little above average. Offense is a little above average, magical and physical. But the big thing about the Dragon is his signature ability is absolutely nuts. The attack speed that you have when you're using the dragon with his signature ability is insane. You are regenning mana so fast. If you have any sort of like stun, poison, any sort of effect that builds up on attack passive, you're going to be proccing that super often. And obviously all of his, other abilities, his fireball, his fire breather ability, all of that stuff works really well on him. I haven't had too much of a chance to explore it on different characters yet, but when you use it on the dragon, he outputs damage like crazy. He's tanky, and just overall, once again, there's nothing bad about him. There are no downsides with the dragon. So one of the better characters in the game. I'd probably say the second best, in my opinion. So that's why the dragon is going to be chilling at S tier. Next up, we have the egg, which... So we're going to be going off of, like I said, stat totals and moves and passives that come with this form. Obviously, in order to unlock the dragon, you need to S tier the egg. So that makes the egg pretty important. But in terms of the other stuff, I'm going to give it C tier. It has the second lowest stat total out of all of the forms. But the reason I'm going to put it in C instead of, D tier, bottom tier, is because it comes with a passive that can actually be really useful for multiple situations, and that is Hardened Shell. So Hardened Shell, depending on what tier you have it, basically, I'll just go from tier 1, which is you can never lose more than 1/3 of your max health from a single hit. You might be thinking, well, that's not super important, but it can help you get to Grandmaster in the Knights Guild because you have to survive an attack as the rat from the One Punch Man, Mr. Saitama himself. And the only way to do that is to put Hardened Shell on as a passive. So you literally cannot do that quest unless you have Hardened Shell. But once you get later in the game, a lot of the things are going to be taking a ton of your health in a single blow before you can regen health with whatever sort of regen health method you have. So usually having a Hardened Shell as a backup option is pretty solid in case you're running into trouble with getting like 2-shot or 1-shot by something. Just toss that on and all of a sudden all of your worries go away. So Hardened Shell I think is a fantastic passive, and that's why the egg gets to be in C tier instead of in D tier. Now next up we've got the Ghost. Now the Ghost I haven't had a chance to use too often, but just looking at some stuff, I think he deserves to be in B tier. He's got slightly above average stats in terms of, just his overall total stats. And then some of his moves, the one I'm thinking of specifically is the Spectral, which allows you to basically just dodge literally everything, or Ethereal is what it's called. You pass through enemies and their attacks. You move a lot slower, and it costs 30 mana per second at tier 1, but being able to just move through attacks is fantastic. It's really solid as a dodging tool to use with other characters. Some of his other things, like his passive, is fine. It's an status effect builder, and then his signature attack is also okay. It's nothing crazy. In fact, I'm actually not a huge fan of it because it's an aura that hits over time. But either way, I think his Ethereal makes up for it, and the fact that he has such solid stats overall. Just super high magical attack and stamina. And mana, I should say, not stamina. So I think, Ghost is a really good character to just throw some other abilities on and farm through a dungeon because of his stat line. So Ghost gets to be in B tier. Next up, we have the Guard, one of the earliest unlocks in the game. This is going to be the first one that I'm going to put into D tier. And, he's one of the early unlocks, so, it's to be expected. But he just doesn't have much, in my opinion, that he really brings to the table. His passive, I never found myself using it. on any other characters. I didn't think it was super useful. Definitely not warranted as one of your 4 passive slots most of the time. His signature attack literally makes him stand still. He cannot move while you're doing your sword slash. And it attacks relatively quick, but it doesn't attack faster than like the dragon, and the dragon can still move. So there are just a lot better options. And then his other abilities that he comes with, Shield Bash and Stomp, are just, they're okay. But once again, I'm very rarely using them. The only time I was using Stomp was when I had to. I mean, maybe if I'm not playing my top tier character and I needed a way to break blunt wards, Stomp could be a decent one. But overall, his stats are well below average. He's in like the bottom 6 for overall stat totals, and he doesn't really bring much to the table, so he ends up in D tier. Next up, we have our friend Zahorse, and Zahorse gets to go into the A tier. The horse is super, super solid as a character. The horse's passive is pretty solid. Let me make sure I get this exactly right. The horse's passive is when you use your signature move, it restores an extra 4 mana when you use it to break objects. In dungeons, there are a ton of objects, so you can restore mana pretty easily. Now, the signature attack is pretty garbage because you kick something behind you. The only good thing about it is it's blunt damage, so it works well with the strongman passive from Bodybuilder. But it's hard. It's a little bit annoying because you have to be facing away from the enemy at all times, which is a very different play style. So you just kind of have to get used to it. But the reason that the horse is in A tier is because his stat totals are super, super solid. Just outside of the top 5 at number 7 overall. And he also has Gallop, which, if you don't know, I'm very fond of movement abilities in this game. Having a movement ability that can break wards of a certain type is exquisite. And one of the ones that can do this is the horse's Gallop. If you need blunt damage and you don't have it built into your character, Gallop is probably the way to go because it's super good. Super, super good at breaking wards and breaking them very effectively. So, and obviously getting you out of a dangerous situation by galloping away. So the horse's Gallop was that plus the stat totals and having a decent passive are the reasons that A is where the horse belongs. Next up, we have the Magician, and the Magician is going to get A tier. It would be S tier if it wasn't for the fact that his stat totals are kind of garbo. He's definitely below average with his overall stat totals, but he comes with some very, very solid things, like his passive is a stun status effect builder. Stunning enemies is silly and very, very good, and I've used it. I think I used it in literally on every character after I unlocked the Magician. So passive stun is super nice. I think, in my opinion, the best ability in the game for breaking light damage wards is the Confetti Bomb. Confetti Bomb is not only good for breaking light wards, but it actually does a fuck ton of damage, and especially if you get the big bomb out of it. And not only that, but he also comes with the Hat Trick ability, which lets you summon familiars to fight by your side. And giving that to another character, having passive damage from your familiars is super, super cool and fun on other characters, because you can have them doing damage while you're worried about your own thing. So the Magician comes with a huge bag of tricks. Get what I did there? And he would be S tier if it wasn't for the fact that his stat totals are pretty darn low. Pretty bad physical attack and defense. His magical attack's decent. His health is average. And his magical defense is average. So just a very average character overall, or a little below average with his stat totals. I mean, he's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He's 11th out of 18. with his stats. So, but the abilities he comes with more than make up for it. And honestly, after talking about it, I'm just going to give him S tier. His abilities really do more than make up for it. Okay. Next up, we have the Mermaid, and our next one in D tier. Now, the Mermaid is interesting because I didn't really play the Mermaid too much. Especially the last ability the Mermaid gets, I really didn't get much of a chance to mess around with it. But the Mermaid's passive is okay. It's I'd say a slightly above average passive. 4% of the damage you take is restored as mana restoration. It's always good to have like at least one passive that helps you restore mana. And this is a pretty good one because you're going to be taking a good amount of damage most of the time. The signature attack, not a fan of at all. The tail swipe, it doesn't do anything better than other blunt damage things. And the aqua barrier is not great. I think the game has, especially once you start getting into like higher level dungeons, there are too many enemies to have aqua barrier be really worth much, in my opinion. Couple that with the fact that the Mermaid is 6th from the bottom with stat totals, 13th, makes for a character or a form that I believe ends up in D tier. She can swim in water, which is nice, but there's a significantly better character that can do the same thing. So that's why the Mermaid is going to get D tier. Next up, we got our boy, the Monk. Monk is an S tier form, and let me tell you why. So the Monk has a few things going for it, and we'll start with some of the things it comes with. The Monk's passive, Smite. Definitely a well above average passive to have come with you. I have it at tier 3, so I'll read the tier 3. It's a 16% chance to strike enemies with a lightning bolt when damaged or healed, and it builds 25% or 25 stun onto an enemy. So anytime you take damage or heal, you have a chance to inflict smite, which is just extra damage output and stun. Now, every build I ran included some sort of self-healing. Every time you pick up a healing item, this could trigger. Once again, every time you take damage, and when there's a lot of enemies, you're going to take a lot of damage. So this passive is just beautiful, just a magnifique passive to have. But the biggest thing that the Monk comes with is the Holy Light attack. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it is pretty much the only attack that is like a wipe, like a screen wipe. Like it hits almost everything in your sight. The entire board gets hit by this thing. And as you upgrade it, it lasts longer and longer. Now, it costs a lot of mana. It does. But damn, it's worth it because it is so good at what it does. And just hitting the entire screen. And being able to throw that ability on whatever character you want, just being able to sauce the whole screen is so good. And that's why the Monk... Oh, and by the way, let's not talk about the fact that the Monk has the 4th highest stat total in the game. So with those abilities that he comes with and having the 4th highest stat total, the Monk is a character I would suggest rushing the tree to get done. So Monk easily gets an S tier in my opinion. I would put it just behind the Dragon in terms of best characters in the game. All right. Next up, the Necromancer. The Necromancer gets S tier. Why? Well, once again, let's start with some of the abilities that the old Necromancer gets. His passive is very... let me make sure I get the numbers right once again. His passive is, once again, another one that's... I wouldn't say it's one of the better ones in the game, but it's so good if you're doing a familiars build. If you're, using the Magician's Hat, if you're using the Necromancer's Demon Summoning, and you have a bunch of friendly characters fighting for you, being able to heal them for damage that you do is great. So he's got a decent passive, but really it's the fact that he comes with the Summon Demon ability, which lets you cast a circle and any enemies that had died in that area be resurrected as demons, which are a much stronger familiar to have as opposed to the Magician's Rabbit in a Hat trick. So you get a super strong familiar out of it. Once again, an okay passive, but and his Necrotic Lightning signature attack is very solid because it restores 12 mana. And by the way, he has a base stat total for magical offense of 837, which hits like a truck. So he's got that stuff going for him. But on top of that stat total that I was talking about with the magical offense, fun fact, the Necromancer has the highest total stats in the game. He just edges out the dragon. The dragon's total stats, once again, when we divide the health of every character or every form by 10, the dragon's total stats are 31-31 for his combination of his health, mana, speed, physical offense, physical defense, magical offense, and magical defense. The Necromancer's is 32-24, which is the highest in the game. Once again, just beats out the dragon, and the dragon is like the end-all, be-all, final character unlock. The big hype, big bad boy, got fucked by a donkey in Shrek. So, got a lot going for it, right? Doesn't have the stat totals going for it because the Necromancer takes it. So that's why the Necromancer gets S tier in my opinion. Just a fantastic character to play as. One of the other only downsides I can think of is he's got a real big body to hit. So, he's going to get hit by some projectiles more than some other enemies, or some other forms. But still, well worth it. Next up, we have Nobody. D tier, this is pretty obvious. Lowest stat total in the game by a country mile. Doesn't come with any abilities besides the little slap he does. So Nostramagus gets D tier. There's nothing much else really to say about that. Next up, we have the Ranger. The Ranger is also going to get D tier. No. We'll put the Ranger at C. Close to D tier. So we're going to put the Ranger at C because in terms of things that the Ranger comes with, the passive is a very average, okay passive. It's not a bad one, but it's not an exceptional one. It builds poison. Another status to inflict, which is good to have a lot of the times. Not as good as stun, but I think a little bit better than fear. So maybe slightly above average passive. The only reason that I would really put Ranger in C instead of in D tier is because of the Arrow Flurry ability that the Ranger comes with. I think the Arrow Flurry ability is super good at breaking sharp wards. I think it's probably one of the better abilities in the game at breaking sharp wards. You shoot, and it costs 33 mana a second. I have it at tier 3. But you're firing multiple arrows per second. So you're able to break like 6-7 wards in 2 seconds. So, I think this is just a great ability for breaking those wards. And that's the biggest reason why I would put the Ranger into C tier as opposed to D tier. But overall stats, not great. Literally 5th from the bottom. So not great overall stats. Nothing well above average for abilities. So C tier for the Ranger. Next up, we have the Rat. And the Rat has to get D tier. It's the first form you unlock. There's some nostalgia. There's some, oh my god, the Rat. Look at his little chompers. He doesn't. Okay. Shoot. I can't actually. After relooking at this, I have to put him in C. So I have to edge him into C for a reason I'll explain in a second. But all of the abilities that he comes with, all of his attacks are trash, garbage. Never use them on another character. Detonate Poison could be interesting. If you do like, I'm thinking of so many builds you could do, but if you have like the Ranger's passive of building poison on the Monk, you have the Monk doing the Holy Light attack and just getting the entire screen poisoned, and then you have Detonate Poison, which explodes all poisoned enemies on screen. You know, that could be a fun little combination to do. A little cool little synergy there. But that's so specific. So all of his actual attacks are terrible. And his stat total is third worst in the game. And out of all of the actual realistic forms to use, dead last. Because the egg, you're not supposed to realistically use. And nobody, you're not supposed to realistically use. So the rat is dead last. But the rat's passive, which is scavenge, health items also restore mana, is, I said it earlier, you on almost every build want to have a mana, some sort of mana passive to help you regain mana. And the rat's is one of the best ones in the game. I think it is the best one in the game. Health items drop like candy. Some health items are literally chocolate bars, so they are literally candy. And every time you pick those up, restoring a good chunk of mana is a fantastic way to passively restore mana. Nothing you have to do. Just pick up those health items. Boom, bop. You're restoring health. You're restoring mana. You're good to go. So the rat gets C tier. Just squirts out of the D tier. Should be D, but the passive makes up for it. Next up, we got Robo Boy, the Robot Man, Mr. Beep Boop Boop Bop Boop Boop Bop. And he's going to sit comfortably in A tier. Robot gets A tier because of a few things, starting with the fact that the abilities he comes with, he has one very saucy ability and a above average passive. So his passive, that's above average, is you reduce the damage taken by 0.75% of your max health. So the higher max health characters are going to benefit from this more. That would be the Dragon, the Necromancer, and Robot, Bodybuilder. Horse has a pretty high health total. So all of those forms will benefit from that a decent bit. And it'll deal 16 base sharp damage to surrounding enemies when you get hit. So having passive damage when you get hit is nice. And reducing the total damage you take is nice. So just very overall solid passive to have. But he also has the Ravager Rocket, which fires a rocket that transforms after 0.5 seconds. And it is transformed into a rocket, a different rocket after 0.5 seconds that is guaranteed to crit. Having an item or something that can guarantee crit and has the longest range out of everything in the game, not bad. Crit damage not only hits like a bus, but you could have the passive where crits heal you for a decent chunk of damage. And once again, having that super extended range is fantastic to throw on a lot of different characters. So the Ravager Rocket ability is exquisite, and the passive is also above average. Those are the only two things he really comes with, but he also does have the third highest stat total in the game. The only other one that is above 3,000. So we have the Dragon, the Necromancer, and the Robot that are all above 3,000 total stats. So yeah, I think he sits comfortably in A tier. He's very slow, which is frustrating, but he just doesn't quite have as much as these guys to get him into S tier, in my opinion. Next up, we have the Rogue, our good friend Rogue. And I got to think about this one for a second here. Yeah, I got to do it to him. Rogue gets D tier. I was really excited about Rogue when I first played him because his signature attack is actually really solid. He throws a lot of knives. He just slings knives. And it does a lot of damage, and it can stack status effects very, very effectively. Here's the issue with the rogue. His passive's garbage. The other moves, the other skills that he comes with are very average, if not well below average. And then to just, stick the nice final knife into your heart. The rogue is barely above the rat with stat total. Barely above the rat with total stats. So overall weak. I mean, just looking at his total stats here. Average mana, decent physical attack, below average physical defense, below average well below average magical attack, and below average magical defense. Pretty much everything's below average. So the rogue is just rough. I got to put him in D tier. He doesn't come with any redeeming qualities. In terms of usable characters, I hate to say it, but he's the worst. He is the worst in the game. Because at least the rat has that passive that helps out other characters. So you hate to see it from the rogue. Next up, we got the Slug. And if you know me, you know I'm a big fan of the Slug. So Slug gets A tier for a couple reasons that obviously we're going to talk about. So Slug has okay stats. It's right in the middle of the road, total stats. But the big thing that Slug Boy gets, which is a very, very pog thing to get, is his passive, which is the crits do plus 75% extra damage against enemies that are status afflicted. There are a lot of characters that are really good status afflictors here. The dragon, the monk, the slug himself is a good status afflictor. Okay. The rogue is a good status afflictor. So you could do a full crit build, probably. But having crits, which already do a ton of extra damage, do even more damage is nuts in terms of your damage output. You can hit like an absolute bus with the slug. And even with just that passive, you throw that passive on the dragon, enemies are getting deleted from existence. They fucking slipped into the world through, whatever type of enemy monster cooch there is, and then just died instantaneously when you throw that slug passive on. And not to mention that, the slug's signature attack, pretty chill, pretty good. It's not crazy, but it's good. His last attack that he unlocks, the Blob Blob, does a lot of damage. It's some range damage. It's another really good way to break light wards if you don't have the Magician unlocked. And he also comes with Slime Slide, which I think is my favorite movement ability in the game because it's just like Gallop. It makes you move a lot faster at the cost of mana, but it also slows down your enemies. So it afflicts them with a status. You move faster. It breaks dark wards with wild efficiency. And I mean, overall, the slug is just, it comes, I mean, that's worth S tier. That's got to be worth S tier after talking about it. Same thing as like the magician, and the slug is one spot above the magician in total stats. So I think the slug deserves S tier. I really do. I think it's probably bottom of S tier right now, but it is S tier, I think. So good for you, Slug. Next up, we've got the turtle. Zombies last. We got the turtle. Now, if you haven't watched my yesterday's video, watch the turtle for a visual on what I'm about to explain to you. The turtle's the best character in the game. Turtle's S tier. Best character in the game. And there's you just couldn't convince me otherwise. You can't. For once again, the reason that I explained in yesterday's video. When I was doing the final dungeon for the campaign in this game, I was using the dragon because I just unlocked him pretty recently and was like, yeah, we'll mess around with the dragon. He's kind of sick. I lost in the boss room. I switched to the turtle, throw on the OP build, cleared it with 0 issues whatsoever. 0 issues. The main reason, well, the couple of reasons why turtle gets to be in this unprecedented S, I'd put him S+ tier. I'd put him a tier above everybody else. There's a few reasons. So it has the 6th highest stat total in the game, which is pretty, above average stat totals. All of it pretty much coming with his defense. His attack stat is not bad. Like, it's an average attack stat, but his defense is beefy. His physical and magical defense is super beefy, which is great, right? Because he's a turtle, makes sense. But the reason he's so good is his invincible combo is a 2-ability combo. His signature ability and his last ability he unlocks called Slow and Steady, which means you have 2 slots available to throw whatever ability you want in for whatever wards you need covered in a certain dungeon. So his signature ability is a shell smash attack called Hell Shell, where you can hold A to fully charge it, or you can just spam A to just dash around with your shell. Spam A. Don't ever charge it unless you're leveling up his quest. But just use the spam A to regen mana like crazy. And then as you're regenning that mana, spend it on the Slow and Steady, which gives your character a defensive buff. You can have up to 5 defensive buffs on the turtle at a time. As long as you're spamming A to regain mana and then spamming B to get those defense buffs, you will be at 5 anytime you're in a fight. And when you're at 5 defensive buffs, when an enemy hits you, you take like 10 total damage. Throw on any minuscule form of lifesteal and health regen, you will not die with this character. You won't. The turtle's passive is whatever, but it doesn't matter. Those 2 abilities plus his beefy defensive stats, combined with the fact that his signature attack is blunt and can knock enemies around, which pairs well with Strongman from the Bodybuilder, means your DPS does not suffer because of your defensive buffs and like being so tanky. You're still outputting damage with the best characters in the game. You're still outputting damage with the best of them while being invincible. It's not like a trade. There's no trade-offs there. It just happens. So Turtle's S tier and the best character in the game. If you want a visual on why that is, check yesterday's video. And then last but not least is our friend the Zombie. And Zombie has to get B tier. Now, the Zombie does have some beefy stats. 5th highest stat total. The big issue with the Zombie, and why I would normally put the Zombie lower, is unless you're fighting, you're just constantly taking damage. Like, the Zombie just constantly takes damage from the body rotting away. Which obviously, that's not great. And the abilities that the Zombie comes with are fine. There's nothing super exciting there. There's nothing like, oh yeah, this is it. This is the one. This is the one. Like, you can turn enemies into zombies with your second ability, which is cool. But once again, it's not crazy. The reason the Zombie gets B tier is for having a passive that I put on every single build that I ever make. And it is just lifesteal. 5% of the damage you deal is restored as health. Every single time you deal damage, restoring health. Pair that with something like Smite, where every time you heal, you have a chance to deal lightning bolt of damage and stun enemies. Having just a passive that lets you lifesteal is so good that it is the only passive. Well, No, I think it actually is the only passive that I use in every single build of mine. Like, I basically only have 3, maybe 2 slots to play with, depending on what character I'm on, because the Zamanamamanaman passive is going to be on. So that's why the zombie gets bumped into B tier. If it wasn't for that, zombie would probably be D. The reason the zombie has such beefy stats is because the zombie's always taking damage. So, you know, you have to trade off somewhere. But the constantly taking damage thing is pretty annoying. So I would have the zombie in D tier, but that passive makes the zombie just a beater of a form to unlock. So there it is, everybody. The Nobody Saves the World tier list. Be sure to like this video and subscribe if you want to see more Nobody Saves the World content. I would really like to do some more builds and mess around with stuff in New Game Plus, but it all depends on you guys. It depends on how these videos do. You know, you guys determine what kind of content I make, essentially, with your viewing and liking. And I do get to see, like, if somebody becomes a member from a video, what video they became a member from. So become a member from this one, and that'd be a huge thumbs up for this kind of content. But either way, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Let me know your thoughts on the tier list. I love each and every one of your faces, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.